The forge fire had died hours ago, but Vaughn Alcott still stood at the anvil, hammering out the imperfections in a plowshare that needed to be ready by morning. The rhythm of metal on metal had become a meditation for him, a way to quiet the thoughts that crowded his mind in the silence of his workshop. He was 30 years old, broad-shouldered and calloused, with dark hair perpetually dusted with soot and eyes that held the weariness of a man who had seen too much of the world's cruelty. He had inherited this smithy from his father 3 years ago, along with the small cottage beside it, and the reputation for honest work that kept the farmers of Millbrook coming back, despite the fact that he never smiled and rarely spoke more than necessary. The sound that broke through his concentration was unlike anything he had heard before: a wet, rattling gasp, followed by the heavy thud of something collapsing against the wooden door of his forge. Vaughn set down his hammer and wiped the sweat from his brow, irritation flickering through him at the interruption. It was well past midnight, and whoever had decided to disturb him at this hour had better have a good reason. But when he pulled open the door, irritation transformed instantly into shock. A figure lay crumpled on his doorstep, covered in ash and what looked like dried blood. In the moonlight, he could see the unmistakable green tint to the skin, the small tusks protruding from a slack mouth, the pointed ears that marked her as an orc. She was young, perhaps 19 or 20, and despite the grime and injuries, he could see that she was trembling violently, her body racked with shivers that spoke of fever or cold or both. For a moment, Vaughn stood frozen. Every instinct he had learned growing up in a frontier town screamed at him to shut the door, to leave her there, to pretend he had never seen her. Orcs were the enemy. They raided farms, they killed travelers, they burned villages to the ground. His own brother had died in an orc raid 15 years ago, and the grief of that loss still sat heavy in his chest like an unforged lump of iron. But this orc girl was dying on his doorstep, and Vaughn had never been able to turn away from suffering, no matter how much easier it would have made his life. He crouched down and slipped his arms beneath her, surprised by how light she felt despite her muscular build. She was tall, nearly as tall as he was, but malnourished, her body wasted by hunger or illness. Her skin burned with fever beneath his hands, and when her eyes fluttered open for just a moment, he saw that they were amber, like honey held up to sunlight. Then they closed again, and she went limp in his arms. Vaughn carried her inside and kicked the door shut behind him. His mind raced as he tried to decide what to do with her. The forge itself was too hot, filled with the residual heat of the day's work, so he carried her through the connecting door into his cottage. The front room was small but clean, furnished with a worn couch, a table, and a few chairs. He laid her down on the couch as gently as he could, then stood back and looked at her properly for the first time. She wore the tattered remains of what had once been leather armor, now scorched and torn beyond repair. Beneath it, her tunic was soaked with blood from a wound in her side that still oozed sluggishly. Burns covered her arms and face, the skin blistered and raw. Her black hair was singed at the ends and matted with ash. Whatever had happened to her, it had been recent and violent. Vaughn had treated enough injuries during his years as a soldier to know that she would die without help. He moved quickly, gathering water from the pump in the kitchen, clean cloth for bandages, and the jar of healing salve that old Marjorie down the road had given him last winter. He had never expected to use it on an orc, but medicine did not care about the color of skin or the shape of ears. He worked through the night, cleaning the wounds as best he could, applying the salve, and wrapping her ribs with strips of clean linen. The wound in her side was deep, but had missed anything vital, And the burns, while painful, were not the worst he had seen. The fever worried him more than anything else. It raged through her body like a wildfire, and several times he thought she would slip away entirely. He kept her covered with blankets and changed the cool cloth on her forehead every few minutes, watching as she drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring words in a language he did not understand. Dawn was breaking through the windows when her breathing finally steadied and the fever began to break. Vaughn sat slumped in a chair beside the couch, exhausted and covered in ash and blood that was not his own. He should have felt satisfied that he had saved her life, but instead he felt only a gnawing anxiety about what would happen when she woke up fully and realized where she was. And more than that, he worried about what the people of Millbrook would do if they found out he was harboring an orc in his home. The answer to the first question came sooner than he expected. As the morning sun climbed higher, her eyes truly opened and fixed on him with an intensity that made him straighten in his chair. She did not move, but he could see her taking in her surroundings, assessing the situation with the wariness of a cornered animal. "You are safe," Vaughn said quietly, keeping his hands visible and his posture non-threatening. "I found you at my door last night. You were injured." She stared at him for a long moment, her amber eyes searching his face for some sign of deception. When she spoke, her voice was hoarse and rough, but her words were clear. Why would a human help me? It was a fair question, one Vaughn had been asking himself all night. He settled on the truth, even though it felt inadequate. Because you needed help. Her expression shifted slightly, something that might have been confusion or disbelief crossing her face. She tried to sit up, then gasped and fell back against the cushions, her hand going to her bandaged side. "How badly am I hurt?" "The wound will heal if you keep it clean and do not push yourself too hard. The burns will scar, but they are not deep. The fever was the real danger, but it has passed." Vaughn stood and moved to the kitchen, pouring water from a pitcher into a cup. When he brought it to her, she eyed it suspiciously before taking it and drinking deeply. "What is your name?" she asked when she had finished. "Vaughn Alcott. I am the blacksmith here. I am Kara." She did not offer a clan name, and Vaughn did not ask, "How did I get here?" "I do not remember much after the fire." "What fire?" Kara closed her eyes, and pain that had nothing to do with her physical injuries crossed her face. "My clan's village. It was attacked 3 days ago by humans from the settlement to the north. They set fire to everything. I tried to help people escape, but the smoke," she broke off, coughing, and Vaughn could see the grief etched into every line of her face. "I do not know who survived. I ran. I just ran, and I kept running until I could not anymore." Vaughn felt something twist in his chest. He knew which settlement she meant. Crossroads. A rough collection of farmers and trappers who had always been more aggressive in their attitudes toward the orc clans than most. He had heard rumors of raids being planned, of men gathering weapons and talking about driving the orcs out once and for all, but he had dismissed them as tavern boasting. The idea that they had actually attacked a village, burned it with people still inside, made him feel sick. "I am sorry," he said, and meant it. Kara opened her eyes and looked at him again, and this time there was something in her gaze that was almost like trust, fragile and tentative. "Why are you sorry? You are human. This is what humans do, not all of us." Vaughn returned to his chair and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I cannot speak for the men who attacked your village, but I will not turn you away. You can stay here until you are healed enough to travel safely. And if your neighbors discover you are hiding an orc, then I will deal with that when it happens." He said it with more confidence than he felt, but the words were out now, and he found that he meant them. Whatever consequences came from this decision, he would face them. He had made his choice the moment he carried her inside. Kara studied him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will repay your kindness when I am able. Just focus on healing." Vaughn stood and moved toward the door to the forge. "I have work to do, but I will check on you regularly. If you need anything, call out. I will hear you." He spent the morning finishing the plowshare and working on a set of horseshoes that were already overdue. His mind was not on his work, though, and he found himself making small mistakes that he normally would never have made. He kept listening for sounds from the cottage, half expecting Kara to try to leave or for someone to come knocking with questions he could not answer. But the morning passed quietly, and when he went back inside at midday to check on her, he found her sleeping peacefully, her breathing even and her color better than it had been. Over the next few days, a routine developed between them. Vaughn worked in the forge during the day, taking breaks to bring Kara food and water and to change her bandages. She was a quiet patient, never complaining about the pain even though he could see it in the tightness around her eyes and the careful way she moved. Gradually, her strength began to return. By the third day, she was able to sit up without gasping. By the fifth, she was walking slowly around the cottage, testing her limits. They did not talk much at first. Vaughn was not accustomed to conversation, and Kara seemed content to observe him in silence, her amber eyes following his movements with an intensity that should have made him uncomfortable, but somehow did not. But on the sixth evening, as he was preparing a simple meal of bread and stew, she finally broke the silence that had stretched between them. "You are not afraid of me," she said. It was not a question. Vaughn looked up from the pot he was stirring. "Should I be? Most humans are. Even when we come in peace, they see only monsters." Kara was sitting at the table, her bandaged hands folded in front of her. "But you look at me as though I am just a person." "That is because you are." Vaughn ladled stew into 2 bowls and brought them to the table, sitting across from her. "I have seen enough of the world to know that monsters come in all shapes and colors. Being an orc does not make you one any more than being human makes me a saint." Kara picked up her spoon and took a small bite of the stew, chewing thoughtfully. "You have traveled." "I was a soldier for 7 years. I saw the capital, the eastern provinces, the borderlands. I fought in skirmishes against bandits and raiders, human and orc alike." Vaughn ate his own stew, the familiar taste of beef and root vegetables grounding him. "I came home when my father died and took over the smithy. That was 3 years ago. Do you miss it? The travel? No, I saw enough blood to last me a lifetime." He met her eyes across the table. "What about you? What was your life like before the attack?" Kara's expression grew distant. "I was a hunter for my clan. I tracked game through the mountains, brought meat for the cooking fires. It was a good life. Simple. My family," her voice caught, and she looked down at her bowl. "My mother and my younger brother were killed in the raid. I do not know about my father. He was away trading when it happened." Vaughn felt the weight of her grief settle over the table like a heavy blanket. He wanted to say something comforting, but words felt inadequate in the face of such loss. So instead, he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, a simple gesture of solidarity. Kara looked up, startled, and for a moment they sat like that, connected by touch and shared pain. Then Kara pulled her hand away gently and returned to her stew, and Vaughn did not take offense. Trust was something that had to be built slowly, like a sword forged layer by layer. He could be patient. As the days turned into weeks, Kara grew stronger. The wound in her side healed into a puckered scar, and the burns on her arms faded to pink marks that she said barely hurt anymore. She began helping around the cottage, insisting that she could not simply accept his hospitality without contributing. At first, she helped with cooking and cleaning, tasks that did not strain her healing body. But as her strength returned fully, she grew restless, and Vaughn found her one morning standing in the doorway of the forge, watching him work with obvious interest. "Can I help?" she asked. Vaughn looked up from the blade he was shaping, surprised. "Do you know anything about smithing?" "No. But I can learn." There was a determination in her voice that reminded him of the way soldiers looked before a battle, ready to prove themselves, to show their worth. He considered for a moment, then nodded. "The bellows need pumping. Can you handle that?" Kara's face lit up with something that might have been pride or relief, or both. She moved to the bellows and began working them with a steady rhythm that kept the forge fire burning hot and bright. Vaughn returned to his blade, but he found himself hyper-aware of her presence, of the way her muscles flexed as she worked, of the concentration on her face. They fell into a new routine after that. Every morning, Kara would join him in the forge, and he would teach her the basics of metalworking, how to judge the heat of the fire by its color, how to hold the tongs, how to strike the anvil with purpose rather than force. She was a quick learner, her hunter's eye for detail serving her well in this new craft. Vaughn found that he enjoyed teaching her, enjoyed the way her face would light up when she successfully completed a task, enjoyed the questions she asked that made him think about his work in new ways. But their growing partnership came with risks. Millbrook was a small town, and people noticed things. Vaughn had always been somewhat isolated, preferring his own company to the social gatherings at the tavern. But now he made himself even more scarce, afraid that someone would ask why he had not been seen in weeks, or why smoke came from his chimney at odd hours. He kept the shutters closed when Kara was visible from the windows, and he made sure to schedule his deliveries of finished work for times when she was resting in the cottage. It was a precarious balance, and Vaughn knew it could not last forever. The question was not if someone would discover Kara's presence, but when, and what would happen then. The answer came on a wet autumn morning when Garrett Fisher, one of the local farmers and the closest thing Vaughn had to a friend in Millbrook, showed up at the forge unannounced. Vaughn was working on a set of door hinges, and Kara was at the bellows, her back to the door. They did not hear Garrett approach over the sound of the hammer, and by the time Vaughn looked up, the farmer was standing in the doorway, his eyes wide with shock and his hand moving toward the knife at his belt. "Vaughn, get away from it," Garrett shouted, his face flushing red. "There is an orc in your forge." Kara spun around, her own hand moving instinctively toward a weapon she no longer carried. Vaughn stepped between them immediately, his hammer still in his hand, putting himself physically between Garrett and Kara. "Stop," Vaughn said firmly. "She is not a threat." "Not a threat? Are you mad? It is an orc." Garrett's voice was shrill with panic and anger. "How long has it been here? What has it done to you? Her name is Kara, and she has done nothing except recover from injuries and help me with my work." Vaughn kept his voice calm, authoritative, the same tone he had used as a soldier when giving orders. "She was hurt and needed help. I gave it to her. That is all." Garrett looked past Vaughn at Kara, his expression a mixture of fear and disgust. "You are harboring one of them. Do you have any idea what people will say? What they will do?" "I do not care what they say." Vaughn's grip on his hammer tightened. "Kara is under my protection. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." For a long moment, the three of them stood frozen in a tableau of tension. Then Garrett shook his head slowly, backing toward the door. "You are making a mistake, Vaughn. A big one. I hope you know that." "That is my choice to make." Vaughn did not lower his hammer until Garrett had disappeared from view, and even then he stood ready, his body tense. Behind him, Kara spoke quietly. "He will tell everyone. They will come for me. Then we will deal with it." Vaughn turned to face her, and he was struck by the sadness in her eyes, the resignation of someone who had expected this outcome all along. You should not have to deal with it. You should not have to choose between me and your life here. Kara moved past him toward the cottage. I will leave tonight. It is better for both of us. Vaughn caught her arm, gently stopping her. Do not run, not yet. Give me a chance to make this right. How? How can you make your people accept an orc? I do not know, Vaughn admitted. But I know that running will not solve anything. Please, Kara, trust me a little longer. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her, because she nodded slowly. One more day. But if they come with torches and weapons, I am leaving. I will not let you be hurt because of me. As Vaughn had expected, Garrett wasted no time spreading the word. By evening, a crowd had gathered outside the forge, not quite a mob, but close. Vaughn could see familiar faces illuminated by lantern light. Farmers he had made tools for, the tavern keeper, whose daughter had once expressed interest in courting him, the miller who always complained about the price of horseshoes. All of them looked at his forge now as though it had become a den of monsters. Vaughn stepped outside alone, leaving Kara in the cottage with instructions to bar the door if things turned violent. He stood on the threshold of his forge and waited for someone to speak first. It was Marcus Vance, the town's self-appointed spokesman and the owner of the largest farm in the area, who stepped forward. He was a broad man with a thick beard and eyes that held more calculation than anger. Vaughn, we have heard some disturbing rumors. We need to know if they are true. If you are asking whether I am sheltering an orc, the answer is yes. Vaughn saw no point in lying. The truth would come out eventually anyway. A murmur ran through the crowd, voices raised in shock and outrage. Marcus held up a hand for silence. Why would you do such a thing? You know what they are. You know what they have done to our people. I know what some of them have done, just as I know what some humans have done. The orc in my home is a young woman who was injured in an attack on her village. She needed help, and I gave it to her. That is all. Vaughn kept his voice steady, though his heart was pounding. That is all. A woman's voice rose from the crowd, Sarah Fletcher, whose husband had been killed in an orc raid years ago. My William is dead because of them, and you are protecting one under your roof. I am sorry for your loss, Sarah. Truly. But Kara had nothing to do with what happened to William. She is not responsible for the actions of other orcs any more than you or I are responsible for the attack on her village. Vaughn looked around at the gathered faces. How many of you heard about what happened at the orc settlement to the north? How men from Crossroads burned it to the ground with families still inside? There was uncomfortable shifting in the crowd. Marcus frowned. That is different. That was retaliation for what? For existing. For living on land that we decided we wanted. Vaughn's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. I fought in the border wars. I have killed orcs in battle, and I have seen humans commit atrocities that would make you sick. The line between good and evil does not run between species. It runs through every individual heart. Pretty words, Marcus said coldly. But the fact remains that you are asking us to tolerate a potential threat in our midst. How do we know this orc will not turn on us? How do we know she is not a scout for a larger force? Because I know her. Vaughn met Marcus's eyes steadily. She has had weeks to harm me if that was her intention. Instead, she has helped me with my work and asked for nothing except a safe place to heal. Judge her by her actions, not by your prejudices. Your prejudices? Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. How dare you, Sarah? I am not dismissing your pain. But would William want you to punish an innocent person for what others did? Is that the kind of justice he believed in? Sarah opened her mouth to reply, then closed it again, tears streaming down her face. Someone in the crowd. Vaughn could not see who put an arm around her shoulders and led her away. The rest of the crowd stood uncertain, torn between anger and doubt. Marcus studied Vaughn for a long moment. "You are asking for a lot of trust. I know, but I am not asking you to trust Kara. I am asking you to trust me. I have lived in this town for 3 years. I have made your tools, shod your horses, repaired your wagons. Have I ever given you reason to doubt my judgment?" The silence that followed was heavy with consideration. Finally, Marcus sighed. "Keep your orc out of sight. If she is still here come spring, we will revisit this conversation. But Vaughn, if anything happens, if anyone gets hurt, it is on your head. You understand that?" "I understand." The crowd dispersed slowly, people breaking off in small groups and heading back to their homes. Vaughn stood in the doorway until the last lantern had disappeared from sight, then went back inside. He found Kara standing in the cottage, her face pale and her hands clenched into fists. "You should not have done that," she said quietly. "You should not have risked everything for me." "It was not just for you." Vaughn closed the door and leaned against it, suddenly exhausted. "It was for what is right, and maybe in some small way it was for my brother." "Your brother?" Vaughn had never told her about Thomas, had never spoken about the raid that had killed him. But now the words came tumbling out, the story he had kept locked inside for 15 years. He told her about how Thomas had been only 12, how he had gone with their father to deliver plowshares to a farm on the edge of town, how the orc raiders had come from the forest without warning, how their father had survived but Thomas had not, and how the grief had nearly destroyed their family. "For years, I hated all orcs," Vaughn admitted. "It was easier than accepting that sometimes terrible things just happen. But when I was a soldier, I met orcs who fought beside us against common enemies. I saw orc healers saving human lives, orc traders dealing fairly, orc families just trying to survive like everyone else. And I realized that my brother would not want me to carry hate in his name. He was a kind boy. He deserves better than to be used as an excuse for cruelty." Kara was quiet for a long time after he finished. Then she crossed the room and did something she had never done before. She embraced him, her strong arms wrapping around him in a gesture of comfort and gratitude. Vaughn stood stiff for a moment, surprised, then slowly brought his own arms up to return the embrace. She was warm and solid against him, and he could feel the steady beat of her heart through the layers of cloth between them. "Thank you," she whispered against his shoulder, "for seeing me as more than what I am supposed to be." "Thank you for proving that I was right to," Vaughn replied. They stood like that for a long moment, and when they finally pulled apart, something had shifted between them. The careful distance they had maintained, the walls they had built to protect themselves, had begun to crumble. Vaughn could see it in the way Kara looked at him, in the softness that had replaced the wariness in her amber eyes. And he knew that she could see something similar in him, some acknowledgement that what had started as simple mercy had grown into something more complicated and far more dangerous. But neither of them spoke of it that night. Instead, they simply sat together by the fire, not talking, just existing in each other's presence, and it felt like enough. The weeks that followed were some of the most peaceful Vaughn had known in years. True to Marcus's word, the townspeople left them alone, though Vaughn could feel their watchful eyes whenever he went into town for supplies. Kara remained mostly out of sight, but she continued to work with him in the forge, and her skills improved rapidly. She had a natural talent for metalworking, an intuitive understanding of how heat and pressure could transform raw material into something useful and beautiful. They worked side by side during the days, their movements becoming synchronized in a way that felt almost like a dance. Vaughn would heat the metal while Kara prepared the tools, or she would hold a piece steady while he hammered it into shape. They developed a shorthand of gestures and glances that required no words, and Vaughn found himself looking forward to each morning when they would step into the forge together. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk. Kara told him stories of her clan, of the hunting trips through mountain passes where the air was so cold it burned your lungs, of the festivals where they would dance around great bonfires and sing songs in the old language. Vaughn told her about his childhood in Millbrook, about learning the trade from his father, about the places he had seen during his years as a soldier. They shared meals and small jokes, and gradually the space between them grew smaller and smaller. Vaughn tried not to think about what it meant, this growing closeness. He tried not to notice the way his heart would speed up when Kara smiled at him, or the way he found excuses to stand near her in the forge, or the way he had started thinking of the cottage as their home rather than his. But the feelings were there, growing stronger every day, and he suspected that Kara felt them too based on the way she sometimes looked at him when she thought he was not paying attention. It was late autumn when everything changed. Vaughn had gone into town to deliver a commissioned set of knives to the butcher, leaving Kara alone at the forge to practice the blade tempering technique he had taught her the day before. He had been gone perhaps 2 hours when he returned to find the forge door standing open and Kara nowhere to be seen. His heart seized with immediate panic. He called her name and received no answer. Then he saw the signs of a struggle, tools knocked from their places, ash scattered across the floor, and worst of all, a few drops of green blood on the threshold. Vaughn ran into the cottage, but it was empty. He checked every room, every corner, calling for Kara until his voice was hoarse. Nothing. She was gone and someone had taken her. He forced himself to calm down and think rationally. Who would have done this? Most of the town had accepted, however reluctantly, that Kara was under his protection. But that did not mean everyone agreed with the decision. His mind immediately went to a handful of the more vocal objectors, men who had made their displeasure known, who had muttered about orc savages and race traitors when they thought he could not hear. Vaughn grabbed his old sword from the chest where he kept it, the blade he had carried as a soldier and had hoped never to use again. He strapped it to his belt along with a knife and headed back into town, fury and fear warring in his chest. He went first to the tavern, where information flowed as freely as ale. The common room went quiet when he entered, his hand on his sword hilt and his face set in grim lines. The tavern keeper, a nervous man named Peter, immediately held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Vaughn, I do not want any trouble. Where is she?" Vaughn's voice was cold and dangerous. "Someone took Kara from my forge. Tell me who and tell me now." The patrons exchanged glances, some uncomfortable, some defiant. Finally, a young man Vaughn recognized as one of the more hot-headed farmers spoke up. Maybe someone got tired of pretending a monster is a person. Maybe they decided to do what should have been done from the start. Vaughn crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed the young man by the front of his shirt, hauling him half out of his chair. "Where is she?" "I do not know, I swear." The young man's bravado crumbled in the face of Vaughn's rage. "But I heard Colin and his brothers talking about teaching someone a lesson. They left town heading north maybe an hour ago." Vaughn released him and turned toward the door. Colin Anderson was one of Sarah Fletcher's cousins, a bitter man who blamed orcs for every misfortune in his life. If he had taken Kara, she was in serious danger. Vaughn, wait. Marcus Vance had been sitting in the corner and now he stood. "If you go after them alone, you will only make things worse. Let me gather some men, there is no time." Vaughn did not slow his stride. "Every minute I waste is another minute she is in their hands." He did not wait to hear Marcus's response. He ran from the tavern to the stable where he kept his horse and was on the road north within minutes. The trail was easy to follow. Colin and his brothers had made no effort to hide their passage, probably confident that no one would come after them for the sake of an orc. They were wrong. Vaughn rode hard, pushing his horse to its limits. The sun was setting by the time he spotted smoke rising above the trees ahead. He dismounted and approached on foot, moving through the forest with the stealth he had learned as a soldier. As he drew closer, he could hear voices, and the sound of them made his blood run cold. He found them in a small clearing. Colin and his two brothers had tied Kara to a tree, and they stood around her with weapons drawn, taunting her. She was bloodied and bruised, but her eyes blazed with defiance even as they threatened her. Vaughn could see that they had not seriously harmed her, yet they were working up to it, building their courage with words and small cruelties. He did not give them the chance to go further. Vaughn stepped into the clearing with his sword drawn. "Let her go." The three brothers spun to face him, surprise giving way to ugly grins. Colin, the eldest, laughed. "Look who came to save his pet orc. Tell me, Alcott, what do you see in it? Is it the tusks? Do they do something special for you?" "Last chance," Vaughn said, his voice deadly calm. "Cut her loose and walk away. Or what? You will fight all three of us." Colin glanced at his brothers, who moved to flank Vaughn. "You are outnumbered. Smart thing would be to turn around and forget you ever saw this." "I have never been particularly smart." Vaughn moved before they could react, his sword flashing in the fading light. He struck Colin's weapon aside and slammed the pommel of his blade into the man's jaw, sending him sprawling. The younger brothers rushed him together, but Vaughn had fought against worse odds in the border wars. He sidestepped one's clumsy swing and kicked the man's legs out from under him, then caught the second brother's knife on his blade and twisted it from his grip. The fight was brutal and short. Vaughn was not trying to kill them. He was not a murderer, but he fought with the controlled fury of a man who had everything to lose. Within minutes, all three brothers were on the ground, groaning and clutching various injuries. Vaughn stood over them, breathing hard, his sword still ready. "If any of you ever come near her again, I will not be so gentle," he said. "Do you understand me?" Colin spat blood and glared up at him, but nodded. His brothers did the same. Satisfied that they were no longer a threat, Vaughn sheathed his sword and went to Kara. He cut her bonds with his knife, and she nearly collapsed into his arms. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently, checking her for serious wounds. "I am fine," Kara said, though her voice shook. "They talked more than they acted, but Vaughn, you should not have come. You could have been killed." "Did you really think I would not come for you?" Vaughn helped her to her feet, keeping one arm around her for support. "You are not alone, Kara. Not anymore." She looked up at him, and in the dying light he could see tears streaming down her face, tears of relief and something else, something deeper. "Why? Why do you care so much what happens to me?" The question hung in the air between them, demanding an answer. And suddenly, all the feelings Vaughn had been trying to ignore, all the emotions he had been pushing down, came flooding to the surface. He looked at Kara, at her amber eyes and her green skin and her small tusks, at the strength in her body and the kindness in her heart, and he realized that he could not lie to her anymore. "Not about this." "Because I have fallen in love with you," he said simply. Kara's eyes widened, her breath catching. "Vaughn, you do not have to say anything. I know how impossible this is. I know that my people will never fully accept you, and your people would likely kill me on sight. I know that whatever we have, it cannot last." Vaughn smiled sadly. "But you asked why I care, and that is why. I love you, Kara. I think I have loved you since the first night when I saw you fighting to live despite everything you had lost." For a moment, Kara simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she reached up and cupped his face with her strong, calloused hands. "You are wrong about one thing," she said softly. "I do have something to say." And then she kissed him. It was a kiss that tasted of blood and ash and desperation. A kiss that held all the longing and fear and hope that neither of them had been able to express in words. Vaughn wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, pouring everything he felt into the contact between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the world seemed to have shifted on its axis. "I love you too," Kara whispered. "I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself that it was just gratitude or loneliness, but I cannot deny it anymore. I love you, Vaughn Alcott, and I do not care if it is impossible." They stood there in the clearing, holding each other as night fell around them, and for a brief moment everything else faded away: the prejudice, the danger, the uncertain future. All that mattered was this moment, this connection, this love that had grown between two people who were supposed to be enemies. Eventually, they had to return to reality. Vaughn helped Kara onto his horse, and they rode back toward Millbrook together. The Anderson brothers had already fled by the time they left, but Vaughn knew this was not over. Word would spread about what had happened, and there would be consequences. But as they rode through the darkness with Kara's arms wrapped around his waist, Vaughn found that he did not care. Let the consequences come. He had found something worth fighting for, and he was not going to let it go without a battle. When they arrived back at the forge, they found Marcus Vance waiting for them with a dozen armed men. Vaughn tensed, ready to fight again if necessary, but Marcus held up a hand in peace. "We heard what happened," Marcus said. "Some of the men have been talking to the Anderson brothers. Seems they gave a different version of events than what I am guessing actually occurred." He looked at Kara, his expression thoughtful. "The orc Kara, are you all right?" Kara nodded slowly, surprised to be addressed directly. "I am, thanks to Vaughn." Marcus sighed and rubbed his face. "This has gotten out of hand. People are taking sides, and if we are not careful, it is going to tear this town apart." He looked at Vaughn. "I am not saying I approve of this situation, but I have known you for years, and you have always been a man of honor. If you say she is no threat, then I am willing to believe you. And more than that, I am willing to help make sure nothing like tonight happens again." "Why the change of heart?" Vaughn asked cautiously. "Because Sarah came to see me this evening. Turns out she has been doing some thinking since that first night about what you said about her husband. She said that William was a good man who believed in judging people by their actions, not their blood. And if you are willing to risk everything for this orc, then maybe there is more to her than we have been willing to see." Marcus gestured to the men with him. "We are going to make it known that anyone who harms Kara will answer to all of us, not just you. And in exchange, I am asking that you both try to give people time to adjust to this. Keep working your forge, keep living your life, and let folks see that she is not the monster they have been taught to fear." Vaughn looked at Kara, and she looked back at him. Some silent communication passed between them, and then they both nodded. "We can do that," Vaughn said. "Good." Marcus turned to leave, then paused. "For what it is worth, Alcott, I think you are either the bravest man I have ever met or the most foolish, probably both." "Probably," Vaughn agreed with a small smile. After Marcus and his men left, Vaughn and Kara went inside. The events of the evening had left them both exhausted, but neither wanted to separate. They tended to Kara's injuries, nothing serious, just bruises and shallow cuts, and then simply sat together on the couch, Kara's head resting on Vaughn's shoulder. "What happens now?" Kara asked quietly. "I do not know," Vaughn admitted. "We figure it out as we go, I suppose, one day at a time." "One day at a time," Kara echoed. She lifted her head to look at him. I never thought I would find anything good after losing my family and my home, but somehow I found you. I found you too." Vaughn kissed her forehead gently. "And I am not letting go." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time since the night Kara had collapsed at his door, Vaughn slept without nightmares. The winter that followed was hard but not unbearable. True to his word, Marcus helped ensure that the townspeople gave Kara a chance. It was not easy. There were still those who glared at her when she appeared in public, who muttered under their breath about unnatural unions and monstrous sympathizers. But there were also those who slowly began to accept her presence, who nodded to her in the street or even offered tentative smiles. Kara worked hard to prove herself worthy of their acceptance. She helped Vaughn in the forge, creating pieces of exceptional quality that even the most prejudiced customers had to admit were well crafted. She assisted neighbors with repairs when asked, never demanding payment or recognition. And she treated everyone with a quiet dignity that was impossible to ignore. Slowly, grudgingly, the town began to see her as more than just an orc. She became Kara the smith's apprentice, Kara who helped old Peter fix his wagon wheel, Kara who had the most infectious laugh at the winter festivals. It was not universal acceptance, it might never be, but it was progress. Vaughn and Kara's relationship deepened through that winter. They were cautious about public displays of affection, not wanting to push the townspeople too far too fast, but in private, they were inseparable. They learned each other's bodies and hearts with the same careful attention Vaughn brought to forging a blade slowly, methodically, understanding that what they were creating together required patience and care. There were challenges, of course. They came from different worlds, with different customs and expectations. Sometimes they would argue about things that seemed trivial: how to season food, how to organize the workshop, whether to bank the forge fire at night or let it die completely. But they learned to compromise, to listen to each other, to find solutions that honored both their needs. And through it all, the love between them grew stronger. Vaughn had never been a man of many words, but he showed his love through actions, through the way he would wrap a blanket around Kara's shoulders when she got cold, through the special tools he forged for her hands, through the way he looked at her as though she was the most precious thing in his world. And Kara, who had lost so much, showed her love through fierce loyalty and tender care, through the way she would massage his sore shoulders after a long day, through the songs she would sing in her native language while they worked, through the way she trusted him with her whole heart. Spring came slowly to Millbrook, the snow melting in fits and starts, the days growing gradually longer and warmer. It was on one of the first truly beautiful days of the season that everything changed again. Vaughn was in the forge working on a commission when he heard the sound of horses approaching. He looked up to see a group of riders coming down the road, not townspeople, but strangers wearing the mixed armor and weapons of orc warriors. His hand moved instinctively toward his sword, but then he heard Kara's sharp intake of breath behind him. "Father," she whispered. The lead rider was a massive orc male, easily a head taller than Vaughn and twice as broad. His skin was a darker green than Kara's, marked with scars from countless battles, and his tusks were prominent. He wore the bearing of a chieftain, someone accustomed to command and respect. When he dismounted, his eyes went immediately to Kara, and Vaughn saw a flash of relief cross the warrior's face before it hardened into something more guarded. "Kara," the chieftain said in the orcish tongue, "we have been searching for you for months. We feared you were dead." Kara stepped forward, speaking in the same language. Vaughn could not understand the words, but he could read the emotion in her voice: joy at seeing her father alive, but also apprehension about what his arrival might mean. The chieftain's eyes moved to Vaughn, and his expression darkened. "This is the human who has been sheltering you." Kara switched to the common tongue, perhaps so that Vaughn could understand and defend himself if necessary. "Father, this is Vaughn Alcott. He saved my life when I was dying, and he has protected me from those who would harm me. I owe him everything." "I see." The chieftain studied Vaughn with eyes that missed nothing, the way Vaughn stood close to Kara, the way his hand hovered protectively near her, the way they looked at each other. "And does your debt extend to sharing his bed?" Kara's face flushed, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "What I do and who I love is my choice, father." The clearing went very quiet. The other orc warriors shifted uncomfortably, hands moving toward weapons. The chieftain's expression went from hard to thunderous. "You love this human. Have you lost your mind? Your mother and brother died at human hands." "I know." Kara's voice broke with emotion. "Do you think I do not carry that pain every day? But Vaughn is not the men who killed them, any more than I am responsible for the orcs who raided his village and killed his brother. We cannot let the cycle of revenge destroy us, father. We have to be better than that." "Better?" The chieftain's laugh was bitter. "You talk of being better while betraying your own people. Do you know what the clan will say when they learn of this? You will be cast out, declared dead to us. Is that what you want? If that is the price of loving Vaughn, then yes." Kara's voice was steady despite the tears on her face. "I will not give him up. I cannot." Vaughn had stayed silent through the exchange, knowing that this was a conversation that had to happen between Kara and her father. But now he stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "With respect, chieftain, your daughter is one of the strongest, most honorable people I have ever met. She has survived things that would have broken lesser souls, and she has met hatred with grace and violence with courage. You should be proud of her, not ashamed." The chieftain turned his full attention to Vaughn, and the weight of that gaze was like standing before an avalanche. "You dare lecture me about my own daughter, human? I dare to defend the woman I love, regardless of who I am speaking to." Vaughn met the chieftain's eyes without flinching. "I know that what Kara and I have is complicated. I know that it goes against tradition and expectation on both sides. But I also know that I would rather die than see her hurt, and I will fight anyone human or orc who tries to take her from me." For a long moment, the chieftain simply stared at Vaughn. Then, slowly, something in his expression shifted. The anger did not disappear entirely, but it was joined by something else, a grudging respect, perhaps, or recognition. "You truly love her," the chieftain said. "It was not a question." "With everything I am," Vaughn replied. The chieftain looked at his daughter, then back at Vaughn. "If I forbid this, if I order her to return to the clan, what will you do?" "I will respect her choice," Vaughn said immediately. "I will not force her to stay if she decides to go with you. But I will wait for her, for however long it takes, in hope that she might return." Kara moved to stand beside Vaughn, taking his hand in hers. "I am not going back, father. This is my home now. These people, this life, this is what I have chosen." The chieftain closed his eyes and took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, Vaughn saw that they were filled with pain. "Your mother would have my head for this, but she also always said that you had your own path to walk, and that I should not stand in your way." He looked at Kara with an expression of deep sadness. "I cannot give you my blessing, daughter. The clan would never accept it, and I am still their chieftain. But I will not drag you back by force either. If this is truly what you want, then I will not stop you. Thank you, father." Kara's voice was thick with emotion. "That means more to me than you know." The chieftain approached her and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Be happy, little hunter, and be safe. Know that if you ever need me, I will come." He pulled back and glared at Vaughn. And you, if you ever hurt her, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth." "Understood," Vaughn said, and meant it. The orc warriors mounted their horses and the chieftain prepared to leave. But before he did, he turned back one last time. "There may come a day when humans and orcs can live in peace, when love like yours is not seen as betrayal. I hope I live to see it, even though I doubt I will. Until then, may the spirits watch over you both." Then they were gone, riding back the way they had come, leaving Kara and Vaughn standing together in the yard. Kara was crying openly now, the weight of everything, relief and grief and fear and love overwhelming her. Vaughn pulled her close and held her while she sobbed against his chest, offering the only comfort he could. "I am sorry," he murmured. "I am so sorry you had to choose." "I am not," Kara said when she could speak again. "I would choose you every time, Vaughn, every single time." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other, until the sun began to set, and the chill of evening drove them back inside. That night, they made love with a new urgency, a new appreciation for what they had and how easily it could have been taken away. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in Vaughn's bed, Kara made a decision. "Marry me," she said suddenly. Vaughn propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her in surprise. "What? Marry me? I know it is backward that I should wait for you to ask, but I do not care about tradition. I want to be your wife, Vaughn. I want to bind my life to yours in every way that matters." Kara reached up and traced the line of his jaw with her fingers. "Will you have me?" Vaughn felt something inside his chest expand, something bright and warm and overwhelming. "Yes," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes, I will have you. I will marry you, Kara. I will be proud to call you my wife." She smiled then, a smile that lit up her whole face and pulled him down into another kiss. They spent the rest of the night planning their future, talking about the life they would build together, the children they might have someday if the spirits blessed them, the forge that would become legendary for its quality work created by human and orc hands working in harmony. Planning a wedding that would satisfy both human and orc traditions, or at least not violate them, too egregiously proved to be a challenge. Kara knew little of human marriage customs, and Vaughn knew even less about orc bonding rituals. In the end, they decided to create their own ceremony, one that honored both their heritages without being beholden to either. Marcus, who had become an unlikely ally, agreed to officiate. "I never thought I would see the day when I would marry a human and an orc," he said with a shake of his head. "But if any two people have earned the right to be together, it is you two." The ceremony was held on a beautiful spring morning in the clearing behind the forge, the same place where Vaughn had confronted the Anderson brothers all those months ago. It seemed fitting to transform a site of violence into one of celebration. A small group gathered to witness the event, some of the more open-minded townspeople. Sarah Fletcher, who had become one of Kara's most surprising supporters. Old Marjorie, who had provided the healing salve that first night, and a handful of others who had come to respect the unusual couple. Kara wore a dress that Sarah had helped her make, a simple green thing that brought out the color of her skin and fell in graceful lines to her feet. She had woven wildflowers into her black hair, and despite her tusks and pointed ears, Vaughn thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Vaughn wore his best clothes, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. He had spent the morning polishing the rings he had forged for them, simple bands of silver, etched with patterns that combined human and orcish designs. His hands shook slightly as he held them, not from fear, but from the overwhelming emotion of the moment. Marcus stood before them and spoke of love that transcended boundaries, of courage in the face of prejudice, of two souls who had found each other against all odds. Then he invited Vaughn and Kara to speak their own vows, Vaughn went first, taking Kara's hands in his. Kara, when you collapsed at my door covered in ash, I had no idea that I was being given the greatest gift of my life. You have taught me that strength comes in many forms, that love can bloom in the darkest soil, and that choosing kindness in a cruel world is the bravest act of all. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to protect you when you need protecting and to step back when you need to fight your own battles. I promise to honor your heritage and your people, and to work every day to bridge the gap between our worlds. Most of all, I promise to love you with everything I am, for as long as I live. Tears were streaming down Kara's face by the time he finished, but she smiled as she spoke her own vows. Vaughn, you gave me my life back when you could have turned away. You saw me as a person when everyone else saw only a monster. You loved me when loving me meant risking everything you had built. I promise to be worthy of that love. I promise to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams and share your burdens. I promise to help you build a future where others like us do not have to hide or fight for the right to love. And I promise to love you fiercely and completely, in the orcish way with my whole heart, my whole body, my whole soul, until death separates us and perhaps beyond. They exchanged rings, and when Marcus pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheers. Vaughn pulled Kara into his arms and kissed her deeply, not caring who was watching, not caring about anything except the woman he loved and the vows they had just made. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Marjorie had brought a cake, Sarah had contributed a cask of her late husband's honey wine, and someone had set up tables with food and drink. Music played a fiddle player from town who had hesitantly agreed to perform, and to everyone's surprise, Kara taught them some orcish dances, complex foot patterns and rhythmic movements that were both beautiful and athletic. Vaughn danced with his wife, holding her close, breathing in the scent of wildflowers in her hair and feeling the solid reality of her in his arms. This was real. This was happening. Against all odds, they had found each other and chosen each other, and now they had declared that choice before witnesses and the spirits themselves. As the sun began to set, and the guests began to drift away, Vaughn and Kara stood together watching the last colors fade from the sky. Marcus approached them one last time, a thoughtful expression on his weathered face. "You two have done something remarkable here," he said quietly. "You have shown that the divisions between our peoples are not as insurmountable as we thought. There will be others who will look at what you have built and think, maybe I could do that too. Maybe love does not have to respect the boundaries we have drawn." He clasped Vaughn's shoulder. "I am proud to know you both." After he left, Vaughn and Kara returned to their cottage now, officially and completely. They had talked about expanding it, adding a larger workshop and maybe a second bedroom for the future, but tonight such practical concerns seemed distant. Tonight was about celebration, about consummation, about two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances and were determined to build a life together. They made love slowly, reverently, treating each touch as the sacred thing it was. Afterward, as they lay wrapped in each other's arms, Kara spoke into the darkness. "You think it will always be this hard? Being different, being together?" Vaughn considered the question. "I think it will get easier in some ways and harder in others. But I also think that anything worth having requires struggle, and you, Kara Alcott, are worth every bit of struggle it takes." She smiled at the use of her new name, the human surname that marked her as his wife. "Kara Alcott," she repeated, testing the sound of it. I like it too." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, dreaming of the future they would build with their own hands, a future that would not be easy, but would be theirs. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. There were still those in Millbrook who never fully accepted Kara, who saw her presence as an affront to the natural order. And there were times when traveling merchants or new settlers would cause trouble, forcing Vaughn and Kara to defend their right to exist together. But they faced each challenge as they faced everything together, with courage and determination. Their forge became renowned throughout the region for its exceptional work. People traveled from distant towns to commission pieces from the human orc-smith team, and gradually the story of Vaughn and Kara spread. They became a symbol of what was possible, proof that the old hatreds did not have to define the future. Other mixed couples began to emerge, emboldened by their example. A human farmer married an orc woman who had been exiled from her clan. An orc trader took a human husband and settled in a border village. Each union was its own story, its own struggle, but together they represented a shift in the world, small, incremental but undeniable. Kara never saw her father again, though she sometimes received messages through traders who passed between human and orc territories. He never gave his blessing to her marriage, but he also never disowned her completely. The messages were brief and formal, but they told her that he was alive and thinking of her, and that was enough. 3 years after their wedding, Kara discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. Mixed blood children were rare, and no one knew what challenges they might face. But when their daughter was born, a healthy, squalling baby with green-tinged skin and tiny nubs that might grow into tusks, Vaughn wept with relief and love. They named her Thalia after Vaughn's mother, and raised her in the forge just as Vaughn had been raised, teaching her both human and orcish traditions, preparing her for a world that would not always be kind but which she could help change. 2 years later, a son followed Thomas, named for the brother Vaughn had lost. He had his mother's amber eyes and his father's dark hair, and from the moment he could walk, he wanted to be in the forge, hammering away at scraps of metal with a tiny hammer Vaughn made specially for him. Watching his children grow, seeing them play with the other children of Millbrook who had learned to accept them, Vaughn felt a sense of peace he had never expected to find. The world was still hard, still full of prejudice and pain, but it was also full of love and possibility. And that was enough to keep fighting for. On quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the forge fire had been banked for the night, Vaughn and Kara would sit together on the porch of their cottage, watching the stars come out. Sometimes they would talk about the day's work, or plan for the future, or simply exist in comfortable silence. But always, Vaughn would take Kara's hand in his, marveling at how perfectly they fit together despite all the reasons they should not. "You ever regret it?" Kara asked him one such evening. "Taking me in that first night, everything that followed." Vaughn looked at her, his wife, his partner, the mother of his children, the love of his life, and smiled. "Not for a single moment. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Kara. You and our children and this life we have built together. I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Kara leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat like that as night fell around them. Two people from different worlds who had created their own world. One where love mattered more than blood and kindness mattered more than tradition. They had faced so much to get here, pain and loss and prejudice and fear, but they had faced it together. And in doing so had proved that love could transcend any boundary, overcome any obstacle, and transform even the darkest beginning into something beautiful. The forge fire would burn again tomorrow, and there would be work to do, challenges to face, and a future to build. But tonight, there was only this: the warmth of each other's presence, the peace of knowing they were exactly where they belonged, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together, as they had faced everything since that night when an orc girl collapsed at a forge door and a lonely blacksmith chose mercy over fear. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything,